Hi everyone, and we've reached the fifth and final part of our series on what is sin. And in this final session, we're going to be thinking about the end, the punishment for sin. Now, just as I record this on the TV, I think the other night, David Attenborough had done a programme about climate change. And in the paper before, there was a little quote from him which said, "I don't think we are as scared as we need to be." Now, what he was saying is that if we were more scared about climate change, it would cause us to take the appropriate action that we need to be taking. In his opinion, we need to be taking far more action to avert this kind of oncoming disaster. And if we were more scared of the oncoming disaster, then we would take the appropriate action. Now, I'm not going to get into sort of climate change, but really just to say that what we fear really does control what we do. Now, fear is a very powerful thing, and what or who we fear the most will control our actions. Now, if we fear one person the most, if you're at school and it's a bully, then that will control your day. But if on the other hand we don't fear them, then that won't control our actions. So fear is a very powerful thing, and it controls what we do. A fear of the future controls what we do in the present. And this is a theme that runs throughout the Bible as well. It does talk about fear. And that is partly what we're going to be thinking about from our passage today, which is from Revelation chapter 14. Revelation is the last book in the Bible, and it talks really about the future, particularly in the sense of what is going to be, what things are going to be like, not kind of predicting specific events, but just generally what things are going to be like, and then especially looking at the end and God's ultimate victory. That's what Revelation is about. And this passage is from Revelation chapter 14, verses 6 to 13, and this is talking about right at the end, where thinking about God's final judgment. So let me read you out this passage. "Then I saw another angel flying in mid-air, and he had the eternal gospel to proclaim to those who live on the earth, to every nation, tribe, language and people. He said in a loud voice, 'Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made the heavens, the earth, the seas and the springs of water.' A second angel followed and said, 'Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, which made all the nations drink the maddening wine of her adulteries.' A third angel followed them and said in a loud voice, 'If anyone worships the beast and its image, and receives its mark on their forehead or on their hand, they too will drink the wine of God's fury, which has been poured full strength into the cup of his wrath. They will be tormented with burning sulphur in the presence of the holy angels and of the Lamb, and the smoke of their torment will rise for ever and ever. There will be no rest day or night for those who worship the beast in its image, or for anyone who receives the mark of its name. This calls for patient endurance on the part of the people of God, who keep his commands and remain faithful to Jesus.' Then I heard a voice from heaven say, 'Write this: Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, they will rest from their labour, for their deeds will follow them.'" So it's important to remember with this passage that it uses kind of language which is perhaps a little unfamiliar to us or a little strange. A lot of it is based on the Old Testament. In order to understand Revelation, you really have to understand the Old Testament. And I'll explain bits as we go through. But really what's relevant for us is not so much understanding this in the whole context of Revelation, but thinking just specifically about what it says to us about God's judgment. So the first thing to note about God's judgment here is that we should fear God above everything else. We should fear God above all. You notice that was what the first angel said. He said, "Fear God and give him glory." Now, fear in this sense, in Proverbs it says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the fear of God is something which sort of a phrase that occurs through the Bible. And it doesn't mean fear in the sense of being scared, in the sense that you might fear a crazy person wielding a knife or a gun or something, but rather fear in kind of an appropriate respect and reverence. It's perhaps a more old-fashioned usage of the word fear. We don't tend to use it that much these days, but fearing in the sense of respect or treating someone appropriately. Now, in the way that people perhaps, again, not so much these days, but might respect a figure in authority like the police or a teacher or parents maybe, that sort of respect. Not of kind of scared respect, but listening to what they say, treating them appropriately and so on. That's what the fear of God really means. And that is, he is who we should fear in that sense most of all, and should let that be the control for our lives. And this is why it says, fear God and give him glory. And then he says, worship him who made the universe. We should give him glory, we should worship him. He is the one who should take the right place in our lives. When we fear God, then he takes or begins to take that right place in our lives, where we worship him and serve him and praise him rightly with all of our lives. He sort of begins to take the centre place in our lives, which is right, because he's the one who made us. And that's why he talks about the creation, because God didn't just make everything, but he made me and he made you as well. So God takes the right place in our lives as the one who made us. And the angel says, fear God because the hour of his judgment has come. It's not, we will be held accountable. And this is the thing that, God made us, and we've spent the last few weeks thinking about what sin is, and thinking about sin is running away from God, sin is ignoring him, rejecting him, idolatry, and all of that entails. And the thing is that we will be held accountable for the way that we've used our lives. And I guess this is thinking really about what the consequence of sin is in the end, that God cannot just simply let us get away with it. God can't simply say, oh, well, it doesn't matter then, because God is a righteous God, and because of all of the reasons that we've been thinking about for the past few weeks, God can't simply just ignore it, especially not because sin is a breaking of that relationship with him. Now, when we say to God, God, we don't want you, God can't say, oh, well, okay, never mind then. We're essentially rejecting the very thing that will be good for us. And God can't do anything else other than to bring punishment. And that's what we're going to think about as well in these next few points. So the second thing then, first thing is that we should fear God above all. The second thing is that we need to choose between God and idols. Or, as it puts it here, between God and Babylon. Now, why Babylon? Well, it talks, you notice in verse 8 it says how Babylon made all the nations drink the maddening wine, literally the kind of the wine that makes you mad, of her adulteries. Now, adulteries here is often used in the Old Testament to refer to spiritual unfaithfulness. And there are plenty of references in the Old Testament to that. I'm not going to go and look all of them up now. I had down Jeremiah chapter 3, if you want to go and look that up, about a passage where God kind of uses adultery as a metaphor for turning away from him. So it's kind of like, we should be faithful to God, but instead we're unfaithful with these other gods, even though they're not gods at all, with idols, if you like. As we've been thinking about unfaithfulness. And Babylon is was one of the superpowers of the ancient world, not so much by the time that this was written, this book Revelation was written by the New Testament, but in Old Testament times Babylon was the superpower who came and they destroyed Jerusalem, and they took people away into captivity and so on. And King Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon. And we can read about that in the book of Daniel. And in Daniel chapter 4, then Nebuchadnezzar is saying, oh, this great Babylon, is not this the great Babylon that I have built for the splendour of my majesty? And Babylon really became a symbol of pride and kind of setting itself up against God. Nebuchadnezzar, in this example, he didn't just worship an idol, he almost believed himself. In fact, I think he probably did believe himself to be some sort of god. And that was often how it was in the ancient world. If you were a king or a ruler, then they thought you were a god. And so it wasn't even that Nebuchadnezzar was worshipping an idol, something other than himself. He was sort of worshipping himself, putting himself in the place of God. And that is what Babylon came to represent. Sort of like the world in all of its opposition to God, the world in all of its rejection of God and worshipping of other things, worshipping of the self rather than worshipping the Creator. And it was sort of became a symbol, really. And you can look up a couple of other places in the Bible where that's the case. But really, the point is that we need to choose whether we serve God or whether we serve Babylon, whether we serve the world in its rejection of God. Now, who do we most fear? Do we most fear God, or do we most fear the world in its rejection of God? And quite clearly the Bible says that we should fear God most of all and not fear the world. A third thing then to remember is that God will punish those who reject him. So it says there in verse 9, if anyone worships the beast in its image and receives its mark on their forehead or on their hand. I think what this means is essentially becoming a fully paid up member of the club. Someone who buys in to the world, someone who buys into Babylon, who kind of rejects God along with the world. And ultimately, that is the camp, one of those two camps that people will fall into, either being for God or being against him. What God says will happen to those who worship the beast, who reject him, who just join in with the world in its rejection of God, is that they will drink. It's interesting in verse 8 it says that the nations drank the maddening wine of Babylon's adulteries, drinking, of course, something of feasting and joy and so on. But God says, well, they will drink. They will drink, but it will be won't be what they were expecting. It will be the wine of God's fury, which has been poured full strength into the cup of his wrath. Wine which is full. In those days, people used to drink wine mixed with water. In fact, some people still do today. But in those days, that was just a common thing. You would have mixed wine mixed with water to dilute the strength. But this is wine which is unmixed. This is wine which is full strength. It's not mixed at all with mercy. And that's the thing, that there will be no mercy at the end for those who reject God. And it will be in the presence, it says, they will be tormented in the presence of the holy angels and of the Lamb. And I was thinking how very often when the world mocks God, and this happens all the time, you become sensitive to these things, I think, after a while as a Christian, and you see in the papers and on TV and in all these different areas how the world so often mocks God and mocks Christians, and it's done without any shame, and it's done quite often to people's faces and in their presence. Whereas here the tables are turned. Here it will be they will be tormented in the presence of God, not having any opportunity to run away or to hide from what they have done, but to be tormented in God's presence. And it says there will be no rest day or night for those who worship the beast. The smoke of their torment will rise forever and ever. Now, we don't know much about what hell is like. There is the image of fire is very often used in the Bible. fire is a very common image to talk about hell, and I think there is something in that. But certainly from what we say here, it talks about it being forever, it talks about being tormented and so on. I think all of those things are pictures, yes, but they express something true and real about what hell is like. And sometimes I wonder whether heaven and hell are really similar in that they are both being in the presence of God, except for those who reject God, for those who hate him, actually to be in the presence of God is the worst thing ever, because they are in the presence of one they cannot stand. And for them, being in the presence of God will be experienced as hell. But for those who love God, and for those who really want to be with him, being in God's presence will be joy and will be peace and happiness and all of those sorts of things, because it will be being what the deepest desire sort of fulfilled, if you like. Now, sometimes people kind of think, and I think we saw this a little bit last time from Romans chapter 1, sometimes people think that God's wrath, God's anger, is just kind of simply, God saying, okay, then have it your way, and allowing people's sin to have its logical consequences. Now, and I think there is some merit to that. I think there is some truth in that, but I think there is more to be said. And there's a quote that I found here as I was reading about this passage, which sort of describes God's wrath. It says, God's wrath, and by the way, wrath is just a sort of more old-fashioned word of saying anger. I think the reason why the Bible doesn't translate it that way quite often is because we think when we see that, we think of human anger. Of course, God's anger is not like that, but anger is what it is. It's true anger in a sense. So God's wrath is not merely the outworking of impersonal laws of retribution built into the structure of reality, but the response of a righteous God to people's adamant refusal to accept his love. The Greek word refers to anger that is passionate and vehement. Passionate and vehement anger, experiencing the full strength of God's anger forever. That is what hell is like. And that is what sin deserves. I think this is really important to remember, that we often think of sin, it's not that serious. Sin doesn't really matter that much. But I think what God intends for us to learn from this is that our sin really does matter. That our sin really does matter, and that it will be punished. Because God cares about sin. God is righteous and holy, and he cannot do anything else. He can't just sort of simply let us off, because that would be a denial of him being God. He would have to say, well, I'm not righteous after all. He couldn't just let us off. But sin has to be punished. But there is good news, because the fourth thing and the final thing is that this calls for us to remain faithful to Jesus. We should remain faithful to Jesus. And that's what the passage finishes with. This calls for patient endurance on the part of the people of God who keep his commands and remain faithful to Jesus. Even when it looks like the world is going mad, we should stay faithful to Jesus. And it says that people who die in the Lord will rest from their labour. Contrast those people who worship the beast, it says, there will be no rest for them. But those who die in the Lord will rest. There will be rest for them. Those who die in the Lord enter into their rest. And the reason that this can be possible is because Jesus is the one who drank the cup for us. Just as I'm recording this, we've just had the Easter weekend, just a couple of days ago. And we remember especially in the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus, it says he was overwhelmed with sorrow, even to the point of grief. And he prays in the garden. And he says, and this is Mark chapter 14, verse 36. He says, Abba, Father, he said, everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will. I think this is a significant thing. The cup that Jesus was facing there was, yes, it was suffering, human suffering, but I think it was more than that. It was more than that. It was the cup of wrath, of anger, which sin deserves, and the punishment for sin. Jesus was facing that in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he knew that God wanted him to drink it, and he drank it willingly, obediently to God on behalf of you and me and all those who believe and trust in the Lord Jesus. And that is really wonderful news, so that we can call God Abba Father, so that we can have that kind of intimate and personal and close relationship with God the Father. Jesus drank that cup of anger and wrath, which was reserved for all of those who believe and trust in him, so that there is no more punishment, no more left for those who trust in Jesus, because we know that it has been taken, it has been fulfilled, it has been paid by Jesus Christ on the cross. And that is wonderful good news. I hope that this video has been helpful to you in thinking about this. I appreciate that this is a big topic. I did another video, and you may want to have a look at that video as well in thinking a bit about God's judgment and hell and so on. I hope that you enjoy that as well. But please do click the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this video. Please do click the like button down below, and please do hit the subscribe button if you appreciate these videos and you'd like to see more like this. I'll be doing something else after this. I'm not entirely sure what, but probably by the time you watch this it will be clear. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you again for another one of these videos very soon. God bless.